In the past decade, wildfires swept through Colorado, bringing unprecedented damage.
We have 1 million people that live in 6 million acres of forest that's at high risk to fire. And that's a lot of exposure. That's a lot of life and property in the way of fire. And the condition of that forest is such that it's ready to burn. It's old, it's dry, not just because of drought, but because of age. So we have a situation that demands attention.
Over the last century, many of our forests have become unhealthy and overcrowded. There are a number of forest types in Colorado. The most common are the spruce fir, ponderosa, lodgepole pine, aspen, and pinyon juniper. Many lack age diversity and are overgrown from a century of fire suppression. 100 years ago, things were very different. Fire was a natural part of the ecosystem. Forests in Colorado were more diverse and evolved with natural cycles of wildfire, flooding, avalanches, windstorms, and insect and disease outbreaks. But changes in our values led to a shift in management of these lands.
Remember, only you can prevent forest fires. Only you.
We've implemented a public policy of fire suppression. Fire suppression has taken fire out of some ecosystems more than it needed to.
Forest structure is very different now compared to what it was 100 or 150 years ago. We have the tendency to look at our forests and think that the way they are is the way they've always been, so we think this is natural. Yet if we look back at the historical data, the picture is so different from today. And truly a couple of old pictures substitute for 10,000 words. They're very convincing, very compelling for us to look at those kinds of pictures and realize, that was natural. And what we have today almost everywhere is not.
Fuels have accumulated so much in these overgrown forests that when they burn, the fire climbs up into the treetops and can quickly become a disastrous crown fire. Some fires burn at such a high temperature that they cause severe and long-lasting environmental damage. Coupled with the drought of the past decade, we now have a perfect storm of conditions, and wildfire headlines emerge from the smoke every summer.
Where before fire didn't carry through those kinds of forests very easily, it was usually pretty patchy. Now the fuels are so continuous and loaded up in the whole vertical structure of individual stands that the fire burns through those stands as an intense crown fire.
One day late in the autumn of 2003, a thick blanket of smoke crawled across the skies of Boulder County.
And notify people to be ready to evacuate.
That evening, the overland fire could be seen sweeping through the hills surrounding Jamestown. Fortunately, the weather turned cold and damp. By the next day, the fire was under control, but still smoldering with a surreal scene of fire-blackened landscape under a layer of white frost.
This fire was moving very fast from treetop to treetop. I mean, it was the roaring train of fire moving at miles per hour, rushing through.
In the hills above Jamestown, firefighters helped protect several homes as the wildfire swept all around them. Firefighter Justin Dombrowski and his crew set up near this house because it had a good defensible space to work from.
I think for homeowners, it's not a bad idea to think about actually having an existing fire line. Because what that does is you can call it a nature trail, whatever you want to call it, but by maintaining that, that is what we used as a buffer with the grass fire that was pushing and racing this way, the trees that were burning. We basically said, this is our defense line.
While most of the defensible space work was already done, some was created at the last minute by neighbors.
I mitigated a lot of it yesterday morning.
A weed whacker and
I was up there cutting everything as high as I could get them, and then cut all the small brush, and then we went up with a weed whacker and brush cutter and cut all around the house just to try to mow it down.
I can't believe it's still here.
When Nancy and Nolan Farmer returned to their home, they quickly recognized the value of good defensible space and good neighbors.
emotional. Our friends saved our house.
My friends and strangers, and
Yeah,
you know, people put their lives on the line,
they did.
and we can't thank them all enough. It's just incredible.
In the spring of 2004, the Picnic Rock Fire swept through almost 9,000 acres near the Poudre Canyon. As fire approached, Mike Palmer began to reconsider his wood shake roof.
It's wood, the whole place will go. Shake roof is the biggest problem with it.
Yeah.
You think about shake roof when you think of a fire, but unless you see the imminent danger, you don't do much.
Some of the most devastating impacts from an intense fire are environmental and can last for decades.
The Hayman fire is the worst case. In that fire, there was such a large opening created by fire, leaving no seed source behind, and it could well be a century before a lot of that area sees its first trees. To say nothing of the fact that had that fire occurred 20 or 30 miles north, there might have been 5,000 or 10,000 houses in its path.
Thousands of Colorado homes are in the wildland-urban interface known as the Red Zone. Many of the major fires of the past decade have occurred in this area.
The Red Zone is a place where homes and unhealthy forests meet. So these forests are ripe for some form of catastrophic event, whether it's fire or insect and disease, and there's homes and people at risk in these areas.
These types of fires, as horrible as it may seem, are an excellent example of what living along the Front Range of Colorado can be like. You know, lodgepole pine forest, it was meant to burn, and in these wind-driven events like this, there's just, in many cases, just no stopping them.
When a major crown fire passes, some homes can't be saved. Many are lost when smoldering embers land in firewood stacked near the house, on pine needles piled in a gutter, on a wood shake roof, or on an attached wood deck.
It's really a homeowner's responsibility to make that area safe for firefighters and to give them a chance to actually save your home.
If someone has prepared their home before the fire has come, that helps us tremendously, and it's much safer for the firefighter to be in there. You know, lives are at stake here.
That's what the thinning and the pruning is aimed at doing, is reducing that available fuel to the fire around my important structure and trying to get the fire to move around it, or make a defensible zone where the fire department has a good chance of safely defending your home when the wildfire does come.
This is the kind of forest that has been giving us a lot of trouble with.
In the summer of 2002, the Bobcat Fire surrounded the Kaufman cabin. 9 years earlier, the Snowtop Fire also swept by within a few feet of it, yet the cabin still stands.
Even though the fire burned very intensely, as hot as I've seen in any of these recent fires, in spite of that, the cabin survived with one person here, and all he did was stomp grass fire out. And it was something that I think really brought home a message, not just to me, but to a lot of people, that you can do things to create defensible space and a structure that won't burn very easily.
Kaufman thinks his metal roof and defensible space deserve the credit for protecting the cabin. He has since discovered that watching the changes that occur in the forest as a result of the fire isn't all bad.
It didn't take very long to realize that the views that we had and the wildlife that showed up and so forth, the high production of understory grasses and forbs and so forth, was something really to enjoy in its own.
Fire is not always bad. While some large wildfires can harm the ecosystem, many fires can be beneficial. Prescribed fire is often used to reduce the flammable material in the landscape, limit insect and disease problems, regenerate stands that are in poor condition, and improve habitat for wildlife.
Ideally, we want fire back in that system, low-intensity ground fire that cleans out some of those fuels and maintains that system the way it's used to being maintained. It's more natural, and it protects it from large catastrophic events. The problem with putting fire back in those systems is we have people that live in that forest. And putting fire in a forest where you have homes is more difficult. Not impossible, you just have to be careful where you do it and how you do it.
In some places, using fire is not practical. Another way to handle the heavy fuels is to turn it into mulch. Several machines have been developed that will mulch a standing tree. The small wood chunks remain on the ground, which helps increase nutrient cycling.
It was way ahead of them as they were trying to move here, and I don't think they would ever caught it. Well,
I think the fire was so fast.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
They were.
Durango District Forester Dan Oshaki approached homeowners north of Durango with a plan to do some thinning and burning in specific areas near their homes.
And said they wanted to do a demonstration control burn. And I think the initial reaction for most people on the ranch was, not at my house. And we raised our hands and said, boy, do it at ours. We'd love to have it done.
Some thinning and a successful prescribed burn was used to treat the hillside below Glenn Sears' home. In the summer of 2002, the Valley Fire moved through from the south and proved that the approach can work.
I think it saved my house. And I think it saved several of my neighbors' houses as well. I mean, you can see down below, it took out everything until it hit the control burn line.
I'll put my blue paint on those trees that are weakest, and those will be the ones that we will cut first.
After the nearby High Meadow fire, Pamela Babish became inspired to invest in defensible space. She lives in a new home that sits at the top of a natural funnel for wind and fire.
I cannot see why anyone that has lived in Colorado within our vicinity, our neighborhood, after experiencing the fires we've had, wouldn't want to do something.
Jen Chase with the Colorado State Forest Service helped her to understand the potential problem and how to improve her defensible space. Babish now also sees a healthier stand of trees.
So many of them were dying due to mistletoe, then the drought that we had, and then by creating a larger space between them, they are growing much better now. You know, they're just seeming a lot healthier.
She says it would be sad to see fire sweep through her land, but it wouldn't drive her away.
I would be sad, but I think it's important to go on, and I would want to go on. And I do love my land. Located.
Ted and Catherine Zocco-Hochhalter have thinned the forest on their land near Conifer. At first they worried about cutting down trees.
Taking the first couple of trees down was really painful. Really painful. Yeah. It like hurt to cut them down.
Well, there was a little apprehension too, I think, about what it was going to look like after we were done. Because taking out that many trees, one of the reasons why you live in the mountains is because of the forest, and so we didn't really know what it was going to look like.
They've been happy with the results and feel good about doing the right thing, but the costs involved in cutting and hauling can add up.
It's hard seeing the money go out like that, but by the same token, we know that it's going for something that is going to benefit us. It's going to benefit the land. It's going to benefit our neighbors. It'll help the various fire departments if they have to come up here for easier access.
You can feel the difference. We have a view here that we didn't have when we first moved in.
The more open view through the trees has been a pleasant surprise. Another benefit has been the ability to attract wildlife.
We get a lot more deer up to the house and elk, and it kind of brings in the wildlife, and that's another reason why we live here.
We better look at these subdivisions now and get on those as fast as we can. We were lucky on the Overland fire. I think you're all aware of that. The 4 houses that were saved on top of that hill, all were mitigated.
Growing public interest in fire mitigation and its effect on the ecosystem is evident in town meetings throughout the state. A plan for fuels reduction in the James Creek area of Boulder County draws a standing room only crowd.
What's going to be the effect on wildlife in these 5-acre parcels?
Actually,
Actually, it's very positive. It's beneficial for there to be this different stand ages. And right now we have such a large group of middle-aged stand types, especially with lodgepole. We have very few seedlings, very little mature and old-growth lodgepole, that this will break that up and give some diversity to the landscape, which is needed and is very good for the wildlife.
We live in a fire-prone area, and if a fire ever did start, it is likely that it would come upslope and that it would cause significant, if not immense, destruction.
In Estes Park, the Windcliff subdivision has taken matters into its own hands.
Yeah, let's leave that up like that.
Okay.
Windcliff has a large number of retirees, and they recognize the need for working together.
Our cooperation from homeowners has been absolutely wonderful. We just simply have not had people who've said, go away, I'm not going to do it. Instead, they've said, what can we do?
It's really important that the communities are involved in this process, that any of this work or any of these projects are going to be successful. So a clearer message, I think, when the neighbors are speaking to each other, encouraging each other to do the work, than to say Mr. or Mrs. Land Management Agency coming up here saying, this is what you need to do.
The sense of community spirit that is generated by an activity of this kind would be difficult for me to calculate, but I know it's substantial.
Have stuff to get done.
We have to present it to Larimer County. They look at the perimeters, where we want the fire district, and
Then you guys are cleared to go.
Right.
In the Estes Valley, a group of public and private interests has formed to look at forest management on a larger scale.
Can't really just be the land management agencies driving this. Fire doesn't recognize boundaries. The agencies need to blur those boundary lines now too, and I think the Front Range Fuels Treatment Partnership demonstrates that interagency cooperation that's going on.
Maybe you can help with it.
The Colorado insurance industry also believes in groups working together to reduce risks on a large scale, because they too are becoming more concerned with potential losses from wildfire.
We've seen the pictures on the TV stations that are just amazing, if not totally frightening. On new business, I think most companies are taking a lot harder look at who they want to insure.
For now, the insurance industry wants to encourage homeowners to improve defensible space on their property.
We aren't the only new stakeholder to this. I think realtors, builders, as well as some of these other jurisdictions or entities are taking a much harder look at this. If we can work with our customers, work with the foresters, the fire officials out there, and the rest of the stakeholders to move forward and come to an understanding as to what needs to be done, I think we're all better for it.
I don't believe fire is a question of if, it's a when. It's part of a normal, natural sequence of events in our ponderosa pine, oak brush ecosystems, and it will occur. We just can't tell you when.
Near Durango, Dan Oshaki has been working with developers to thin the forest before new subdivisions are built. Ron Tyner was reluctant to spend the time and money, but soon found it to be a good investment.
And immediately the lots started selling. And it was the lots that we would complete the work on. It wasn't that people were really that aware of the actual fire mitigation. It was that the lots looked nicer. We actually increased those prices 25% over and above our appraisals that we'd gotten within that subdivision. And again, they started selling.
Oshaki believes doing fuels reduction on a landscape scale before construction begins simply makes good economic sense.
The developer was required to thin and treat fuels. The lots stayed on the market for less time, sold for more. It's important to not be, in my opinion, creating new problems. New subdivisions ought to be required to do fuels reduction if necessary. Yeah, there's one right there. So this tree was pretty heavily infested, and looks like a new generation of beetles is maturing.
Several different insects and diseases impact the condition of Colorado forests. Near Durango, an Ips beetle infestation has taken out many of the piñons. In the high country, large expanses of pines are dying from mountain pine beetle, and the forest is becoming a bigger fire hazard.
The ties between fire and insects are cause and effect both ways. Insects lead to fire fuels. Fire suppression leads to insect epidemics. The two are intricately intertwined.
Insects and disease are a natural part of the ecosystem, similar to fire. Often, if fire doesn't thin the forest, insects or disease will.
Some of the outbreaks we're seeing now are different, at least in terms of recent history, because of two things. One is the condition of the forest has changed due to human fire suppression that's occurred since the 40s, and the fact that we've had less tree cutting. Both of those two factors have led to an overall more homogeneous forest.
Once again, the problem comes back to an overgrown forest with too many trees. The drought of the past decade has magnified the problem. The Bosque del Oso near Trinidad is the largest state wildlife area in Colorado. Parts of the 2002 spring fire burned large sections, leaving less than desirable wildlife habitat. Division of Wildlife District Manager Al Trujillo says that a mosaic pattern of burn is much better for wildlife.
In a truly responsive ecosystem, you've got a broad range of plant types and plant ages for a broad range of wildlife species.
When conditions are safe, prescribed burns are used to improve the habitat diversity.
By setting back that age class of the shrub growth from an old stem to just very vibrant growth at the base there, we are creating a better condition for the animals in the area. And we are seeing a response to it by a lot of the animals too.
All these little new shoots are all the regeneration since the fire of 2002. You can look at every single one of these has been browsed on by deer or elk.
A thick, overgrown forest often needs to be thinned before fire is introduced. Mechanical tree harvesters have proven to be a safe and efficient way to prepare the Bosque del Oso for future prescribed burns.
The whole idea behind using mechanical means to improve the forest first before reintroducing fire into the landscape is to have a cooler, more beneficial fire rather than a crown fire that gets out of control and poses health and safety risks.
Everyone loves to see aspens in the fall, and they are a good example of a species that thrives soon after a fire.
Aspen is an important species to the state of Colorado, primarily because it's a hallmark of Colorado. We like to see yellow aspen in the fall. We sell ourselves based on seeing yellow aspen in the fall.
Aspens are often the first trees to emerge after a fire. They thrive from the open space, intense sunlight, and reduced competition. But fewer fires over the years has resulted in fewer stands of aspen.
On the western slope, it's likely, according to colleagues of mine, that we had a lot more extensive aspen and a lot more pure stands than we have today.
It's a very nutritious forage for the deer and the elk when it's a smaller tree. They eat the twigs and the limbs and the leaves.
While fire can be beneficial to the ecosystem, a large hot wildfire can scorch the land and cause big problems in a watershed.
We're standing in the remnants of the Hayman fire. And as you can see, the sediment flow coming down this drainage is immense.
The Hayman fire did tremendous damage to the watershed above Cheeseman Reservoir. 2 years later, Denver Water continues to fight erosion by building barriers designed to keep sediment and debris out of the reservoir.
It's a huge expense for a municipality to have to put a structure like that in place.
we're trying to take every precaution that we can to prevent the sediment from going into the reservoir. It could go on for years upon years. We're just not sure. This isn't in the news and every day anymore. People come up here and do see some greenery, but we still have a huge problem here, and it's costing us a tremendous amount of money.
The cost of the Hayman fire to Denver water so far is estimated at nearly $7 million. The potential for similar scenarios lies in thick forests throughout Colorado. Many foresters would like to see more resources go to wildfire hazard reduction long before fires begin.
When wildfire occurs, we have little choice as public agencies but to respond and try to protect those communities, and that cost can be significant.
We're dealing with a huge problem here, and if we can get in early, and if we can do a lot through education and prevention before we have fire on the doorsteps, it's going to be a huge savings in dollars because it is not inexpensive to suppress fires.
I think we're right on the verge now here in Colorado and in the Front Range for setting the stage that all of us can get together. We need to be thinking, how can we do this in a way that is as socially acceptable as possible? How can we do it in ways that we make the economics work as much as we can so that we keep our ecosystems functioning as close to their natural condition as we can? It's a big job, but if we fail to do it, we run some pretty high risks.
We value our forests for benefits such as recreation, wildlife, water, and wood products. But the perfect storm of conditions still waits in the red zone. If something isn't done to address this buildup of fuels, nature could act in the form of destructive wildfire.
It's a responsibility that we all have, and it's one not to be taken lightly.
We live amongst the wildlife, amongst the forest, and I think we should do everything we can to help it thrive for many generations to come.
Smokey Bear has preached fire in a largely negative sense. Fire is fire. It's not good or bad. We need to study how nature manages itself and then mimic that with our cutting practices or our management actions. Nature is always going to show us the way if we'll just listen.